Hello there. In today's video, we're going to be doing an overview of the Catholic Reformation. That is, the Catholic Church's response to the Protestant Reformation and the reforms that occur within the Catholic Church. So, quick overview. The dates we'll be looking at are roughly from 1530 to 1564. It's within this range of dates that the Catholic Church organizes its response to the Protestant Reformation, and also during which a number of other important changes occur, some of which might have been independent of the Protestant Reformation, which we'll talk about. So looking at the changes that occur within the Catholic Church, we're going to look at some religious innovations, including new religious orders. We'll look at the efforts of the Catholic Church to spread Catholicism to new lands and to bring new cultures into the Catholic Church. And we'll also look at the reforms that the Catholic Church undertakes in the Council of Trent. Also, we'll be looking specifically at some of the measures undertaken by the Catholic Church to counter and in some cases push back against the spread of Protestantism. So let's get started. First of all, let's talk a little bit about terminology. So in the more traditional AP European history books and more traditional accounts of European history, you'll see the word or the term Counter-Reformation rather than the Catholic Reformation. Today, the preferred term is Catholic Reformation. And the reasoning here, which I think is pretty valid, is that in a lot of traditional English language history, there is kind of a bias and a focus on Protestantism because England and the United States were for a long time largely Protestant countries. So they viewed Protestantism as kind of the creative force and the Catholic Church as just kind of like passively reacting to the changes caused by Protestantism. More recent scholars have argued that a lot of the elements of the Catholic Reformation were already in progress and that the Catholic Church was already undergoing a process of reform and self-critique. For example, the writings of Erasmus point out a lot of the problems within the Catholic Church that are resolved in the Council of Trent. So some historians have argued that the Catholic Reformation isn't necessarily just a response to Protestantism, but is at least to some degree a process of internal reform that may have occurred to some extent, even without the Protestant Reformation. So, for example, Erasmus was saying that Luther needed to cool his jets and that if everybody just chilled for a minute, the Catholic Church could fix these problems and we didn't have to have a fracturing of Western Christendom into all of these different factions. So anyway, there are definitely some elements of the Catholic Reformation that are specifically targeted to go against Protestantism, but there are also some elements that may represent, and I think do represent, kind of a internal, innovation and flourishing that happen independently of the Protestant threat. So anyway, I'll usually be calling it the Catholic Reformation. Sometimes when I'm talking about specific attacks against Protestantism, I may say Counter-Reformation, but there you go. Those are the terms. So now let's move on to look at the religious innovation that occurs within the Catholic Reformation. So the two kind of big additions to Catholic thought and culture during this time period are two new religious orders that are both very powerful. Well, actually, so one isn't necessarily like a new order, but anyway. So the first really big new innovation is the creation of the Society of Jesus, sometimes known as the Jesuits. So the Jesuits were a order within the Catholic Church, not really not really, kind of like monks, but not monks, because unlike monks who kind of withdraw from the world and live in separate communities and monasteries, the Society of Jesus was 100% committed to going out into the world and fighting to spread Catholicism. So let's say a little bit about their founder first. So the founder of the Society of Jesus is Saint Ignatius Loyola, depicted here. Loyola started out his life as a Spanish soldier, and I think some of his militant attitude that he brings to the Catholic Church might you could probably make a solid argument that this traces back to his earlier career as a soldier within the Spanish army. So anyway, Loyola was a soldier in the Spanish army. He was wounded in battle, and during his recovery, he had a religious experience in which he kind of like directly communicated with the divine, and he decided that upon his recovery, he was going to devote his life to serving the Catholic Church. And upon his recovery, he began to organize a community of like-minded individuals who were 100% loyal directly to the Pope, and who basically served as kind of like the Pope's spiritual army, going out and spreading Catholicism wherever it was possible, rooting out heresy, and fighting Protestantism in the places where Protestantism was spreading. Now, a lot of times when a person outside of the church has a religious vision and wants to start a religious community, they can get in trouble. And a lot of times you could be at risk for heresy. But at this point, the Pope was actually very open to Loyola's idea, and the Pope embraced the Society of Jesus as a new tool for him to carry out reforms and do what needed to do in this time of stress, as more and more areas were falling away from the Catholic Church. So Loyola argued that in order to be an effective soldier for Christ, the first thing that you had to do was spiritually purify yourself through like a strict process of self-examination. He also was a firm advocate of confession as a spiritual practice, which began to catch on during this time period as a common practice within the Catholic Church. They also were very firm advocates of education. They believed that if children were educated correctly, they would essentially be immune from heresy. So if you could control education in countries, then you could basically teach them the correct version of Christianity and teach them why other versions of Christianity were wrong. And the Jesuits would go on to found tons of schools throughout France and Spain and Italy, and also other parts like Canada, like French Canada, for example. And they would found very, very high quality schools, and a lot of leading thinkers during the 16 and 1700s will come out of Jesuit schools. Some of them famous atheists, like, for example, Voltaire. I guess Voltaire might be a deist, but anyway, not a Christian. So anyway, besides education, they also did a lot of missionary activity. Some of the most successful missionaries would be Jesuits going to India and China and Japan, and also into the New World, trying to convert the various native societies. In like, for example, in the jungles of the Amazon rainforest, among other places. And also they would engage in public debates with Protestants in towns where there was a mixed population of Catholics and Protestants, trying to push back against Protestant propaganda as they saw it. So that's the Society of Jesus. So they're a very practical, very action-oriented branch of the Catholic Church, kind of frontline soldiers in spreading and defending the Catholic faith. So another major figure within the Catholic Church that emerges during this time period is a very influential and charismatic religious figure, Saint Teresa of Avila, who had direct encounters with God, mystical visions if you will, and who wrote incredibly movingly about these visions. She also then went on to found religious communities for women. I would need to check my notes, which I don't actually have in front of me. This is all from memory, but I believe that the community that she founds is known as the Ursulines. And I'm not 100% sure if she founds that community or if she just like kind of reinvigorates it. But anyway, the reason that this is all important is Saint Teresa kind of embodies all of the good stuff that people like that Protestantism doesn't have anymore. So first of all, Protestantism doesn't have saints anymore. So you basically are allowed to pray to Jesus and to God the Father and the Holy Ghost, and that's it. But all the cool saints, including the Mother of God, Virgin Mary, are no longer appropriate objects for prayer and worship. And a lot of people feel much more comfortable praying to the Virgin Mary or to other saints for religious help rather than to the big guys, Jesus and God the Father and stuff like that. Second, Saint Teresa offers an example of female religiosity, which is one of the only avenues for women in Europe to pursue an independent life. And going all the way back into the Middle Ages, female monastic communities, nunneries or convents, were options for women to go to if they did not want to get married and have kids and basically, live a domestic life. Protestantism also gets rid of this. They shut down the monasteries. The kings sell off the monasteries. Martin Luther famously marries a nun or an ex-nun. And so this is very appealing to a lot of women because it gives them another option. And in some cases, these convents could be quite powerful, and the abbesses, the women who ran these convents, were very important and influential figures, including Saint Teresa, who went on to be a fairly important and independent female, religious figure. So anyway, these are kind of two examples of like spiritual innovation within the Catholic Church. Kind of emphasize one is very practical, and the other is kind of showing off the sort of mystical, otherworldly elements that Protestantism is specifically getting rid of. And both of these are going to be powerful forces for helping to stop the bleeding and also to win converts to Catholicism. So the next big strategy the next big component of the Catholic Reformation is a very active effort to spread Catholicism to new areas of the world. In the 1500s, Spain and Portugal were the leading maritime nations and controlled vast empires that stretched around the world. And they were also two of the most devoted Catholic countries. We'll see more about Spain's total commitment to the Catholic Church in the lecture on Philip II, which is to follow. But on top of establishing trade routes and trying to build up a political and economic presence in other continents, Spain and Portugal were also deeply committed to spreading Catholicism in these places, and they did so with mixed results. So within the Americas, they were wildly successful at converting the majority of the population to Catholicism. And this was easy, partially because they actually were the dominant political power there, so they could basically just ban all the other religions, and then the only option you had left was either to do religious stuff secretly or, go to the nearby church. It also helped that the societies that they were seeking to convert were, in many cases, not literate, or only, literacy was quite rare. The Aztecs and the Mayan had a written language, but the Inca did not have a written language at all. So this made it much easier to kind of spread Catholic ideas there and to erase other religious practices, or at least to suppress them. However, there is a lot of evidence that indigenous spiritual beliefs continued to exist alongside Catholicism, and in some cases mixed with Christian beliefs in in Mexico and South America. But by and large, Latin America is fully incorporated into the Catholic Church, and today it's actually Latin America is the largest source of is the kind of the strongest spot for Catholicism in the world as Europe becomes more and more secular. So yeah, that's the New World, which is a huge success story for Catholicism. Brings a whole continent and a half into the fold. On the other hand, in Asia, the Catholic Church sees initial success. That one of the main leading figures here is Francis Xavier, who endeavors to spread Catholicism to the major civilizations of Asia. But in the long run, this is essentially a failed effort. And I don't want to go too much into it, but a lot of the rulers of these places were quite happy to entertain Christian missionaries or Catholic missionaries at first. In China, for example, they were very interested to learn about Spanish or European astronomy, mathematics, navigation techniques, and that. And they were happy to let the missionaries talk about Jesus on the side. But they actually didn't really have much interest in allowing a foreign religion to become embedded in their culture, so they never really allowed it to spread. In Japan, there was actually some a good deal of success in spreading Catholicism to the kind of lower classes. But as soon as this began to take off, the government of Japan, which had just recently centralized under the Tokugawa shogunate, clamped down on it and basically wiped it out, including killing most of the missionaries who were active at the time in Japan. So whereas in the New World, Spain and Portugal were basically able to take over, eliminate the old elites, and impose their religious views on the population. In India, China, and Japan, these powerful and well-established civilizations were able to prevent it from really becoming a major force. Also, this new religion would have probably been less enticing to these more advanced civilizations, since they were more or less on par with Portugal and Spain in most regards, technology, literature, stuff like that. So mixed results in terms of attempting to spread Catholicism. And so kind of the last wing of the kind of reform of the Catholic Church was to specifically address the abuses that had kind of started the whole Protestant Reformation in the first place. So a lot of people were very upset about a number of practices that were going on within the Catholic Church. Kind of the main targets that both Erasmus and Luther and a whole bunch of other people brought up were the cash payments for indulgences, so get out of purgatory free cards, or not free, it was actually really expensive. Simony, which was the selling of church offices, just for a one-time cash payment. You could become the bishop of the bishop of Milan if you wanted to. And so that was seen as basically totally corrupt and allowed for very unreligious people to become very important figures within the church. So the third one was the practice of clerical concubinage. That is, priests weren't allowed to get married, but they would just have unmarried women who lived with them and bore their children, which a lot of people said was even worse than priests getting married. And the last one was the practice of rich people being the bishops of multiple bishoprics. So you'd have one guy who was the bishop of Munster and Milan and wherever, all at the same time, which meant that he wasn't actually able to oversee the operation of the church in any of these places. At most, he'd be able to oversee one of these, but oftentimes they would spend all of their time at Rome trying to play the political game there, and basically just viewing these different appointments as cash cows, where they would then collect the money and then use that money in Rome on whatever they wanted. So all of these abuses were wildly unpopular, and the Catholic Church realized that they had to clamp down on this corruption, otherwise they would continue to lose ground to alternate churches. And so they managed to eventually call a church council, which met at the lovely little Italian town of Trent up in the mountains, which was a convenient meeting point for the German emperors to come down and the Pope to come up, meet in the Alps, right in the middle, and work out these abuses. And basically what they do is they ban all of these. They say, all right, no more cash indulgences, no more sale of offices, no more concubines, sorry guys, and you can only be bishop of one place at a time. And if you're a bishop, your main job is to oversee the church in that area and not to just, goof off in Rome. So they basically do a very good job of eliminating a lot of church corruption. I'm sure, some remains. It's a giant bureaucracy. There's got to be some. But they really do very seriously try to emphasize the spiritual nature of the job. And they do a good job of attracting people who are actually really committed to Catholicism and not just viewing the church as a career opportunity. Now, there's a lot of stuff that they don't change at the Council of Trent. They do not back down at all on any theological points. On Catholic doctrine, they reaffirm everything that Luther and Calvin has questioned. So in the matter of the Holy Mass, the Eucharist, the bread and the wine still do literally transform into the body and blood of Jesus, which Calvin has called into question. And the Pope is still the supreme authority and the supreme representative of God on earth. Many people have been calling for church councils to be the supreme authority. And ironically, at the Council of Trent, this church council reaffirms the absolute authority of the Pope. So basically, they get rid of a bunch of corruption, but they keep Catholic theology the same. They're not going to back down on any of these ideological points. Right, cool. So those are kind of the three big changes that occur within the Catholic Church. So new religious orders, spread of Catholicism to the New World and a little bit to South and East Asia, and the reform of church abuses. Now, let's look at some of the specific measures undertaken by the Catholic Church to counter Protestantism. So, first of all, the Catholic Church engages in open ideological warfare. They are 100% open about the fact that Protestantism is a huge threat, and they want to fight back against it. And they implement a number of measures designed to prevent the spread of Protestant ideas into Catholic areas, and to root out and to actually push back against Protestant regions when possible. So they create an index of banned books, and they put on it all the Protestant stuff, but also any other things that seem like they could possibly threaten Catholic ideology. And a lot of early scientific works are going to end up on the index of banned books alongside Protestant theology. The creation of activist inquisitions is going to happen. The Inquisition already did exist, but the Inquisition is going to become a much more important feature within the Catholic countries. And so specifically the Spanish Inquisition, but also the Roman Inquisition, which is directly loyal to the Pope, will go around and try to root out heretical ideas. On top of this, there's going to be an emphasis within Catholic churches to educate even the sort of lowest members of society in the basic principles of the Catholic faith. Before this time, since church services were actually in Latin, the average peasant probably did not know really what the deal was. Like, he knew Jesus was a guy, and he saw pictures of, like the cross and God with the big beard and stuff. But the average peasant probably didn't really know what Catholicism was all about. So there's an increased emphasis on teaching everybody the basic principles of Catholicism. And in order to do this, you also have to actually start training staff to run the churches and to speak good Latin and to actually know what they're saying. So there's an emphasis on that. And there's also paid preachers who will go into Protestant countries and argue and try to defend Catholicism within kind of these border zones. Oftentimes these guys are Jesuits themselves. On top of that, on top of banning Protestant ideas, there's also an emphasis on the production of Catholic propaganda. So there's increased use of the printing press to produce devotional materials. One of the main things that would be printed would be like a catechism, which is a kind of a question and answer guide to what you're supposed to actually believe. Also like books of prayer and lives of the saints and stuff like that, to start kind of getting Catholic literature out there to compete with Martin Luther's pamphlets and stuff like that. And another thing, and I think this is actually a real strong point of the Catholic Reformation, is the church funding of art and architecture. And the specific type of architecture that is going to emerge during the late 1500s and continue into the 1600s is known as Baroque art. And this is incredibly spiritually powerful, kind of epic art designed to fill the viewers with awe. Baroque art is going to be used by the Catholic Church. It's also going to be used by centralizing rulers. And kind of the unifying theme here is just big and dynamic and awesome. But the Catholic Church is one of the main patrons of Baroque art and architecture. And the emphasis here is on producing an emotional response among the people who are viewing this art, who are entering these churches, to kind of give them that kind of like, goosebumpy feeling of the divine when you enter these rooms or experience these paintings. So here are a couple examples. So this a piece of sculpture is by Bernini, who is one of the leading Baroque artists of this time period. This is a sculpture of Saint Teresa. So Saint Teresa of Avila wrote about her spiritual encounters, and in one of her most famous passages, she describes how an angel from heaven descends to her, or as she is lifted up into heaven. Notice the golden rays coming down, this is just actually gold up here. So she was lifted up into heaven out of this world, and an angel descended with a flaming arrow and pierced her heart with it. And her heart was inflamed by the love, the absolute love and presence of God. And it's just a totally kind of ecstatic experience. Take a look. So also this would have been viewed from below, so you'd be looking up at it, and the idea was that this giant hunk of marble would seem to be rising up dynamically, and her, the cloth is rippling in the air as she's carried up. So just very dynamic, very emotionally powerful art, designed to convey a spiritual message to the people who viewed this. And this would have been displayed in a church, so the people who went to this church would see this and be like, "Oh my God," and which is exactly the point. In the realm of painting, there's a number of really amazing artists. One of my favorites is El Greco. El Greco was trained. He came from Venice. He trained in Venice, but then he went to work in Spain. And he specialized in kind of intentionally unrealistic painting that was designed to create a sort of like dreamlike, like mystical vision-like look. So unlike the painting of Michelangelo or Raphael, which is like very like real and solid, El Greco intentionally kind of distorts the classic rules of Renaissance art to create dreamlike figures. So here Jesus seems almost to glow. He's pale like a ghost, and there's kind of just this indistinct swirling background. In a much more epic picture, here's the painting of it's a memorial for the death of a leading Spanish nobleman. I forget his name, but I think it's the burial of Count Orgaz or Ortez or something like that. But anyway, the main point that I mainly want to point out is how El Greco contrasts the like material world. So look, the very, very dead body of the nobleman, the like kind of like solid, realistic images of the Spanish elite down here, and then his soul being carried up into heaven, and kind of like the swirling manifold of saints and angels and God and light and all of that stuff. So this was a huge painting. And so standing here and having your eye carried up into this kind of swirling divine realm would have had a very powerful impact, especially on people who weren't used to seeing art like this. So it's kind of taking Renaissance art and using it to try to induce a sort of mystical or at least spiritual experience. The same thing happens in Baroque architecture. So a lot of Renaissance architecture is very nice. It's very calming. It's very light. Baroque architecture takes the same basic elements of Renaissance architecture, including like the classical arches and the same basic layout of churches, but it takes the decoration and the interior to kind of a whole new level. The kind of incredible intricacy of the decorations on the interior of the Baroque church in many ways is closer to the sort of like staggering complexity of Gothic architecture, and also the murals, which are quite common on the ceilings of Baroque churches, make use of perspective to be kind of like dizzying and almost like realistic visions into heaven as you gaze upwards. So all of this is very clearly being used by the Catholic Church as an effort to, kind of play to their strengths. For Protestantism, the Calvinism specifically actually bans images. So Calvinism is very much just about words and ideas, but the Catholic Church is kind of betting a lot on the power of the visual image and of the experience of space to convey a sort of spiritual message and to win converts that way. So that's Baroque architecture. It's super cool. I'm going to do another video that I'll post later that'll go into more detail about Baroque art and how it's used by the church and rulers. Now, the last kind of effort, and this is very obvious, to push back against Protestantism was to get Catholic rulers to engage in religious warfare against Protestant states. And if you did this a lot, you could actually get a special honorific title known as the Defender of the Faith, which didn't really get you anything, but made you feel good if you got it. And we're going to see many examples of Catholic rulers kind of taking it to the Protestants and trying to reclaim territory for the Catholic Church. Usually this is going to be a bust, but occasionally it will be successful. So the very first example of religious warfare that we see is known as the Schmalcaldic War. So the Schmalcaldic League was an alliance of North German principalities, who basically like the NATO of Protestantism, mutually assured defense. And so these guys, all the Protestant princes up here in the north, this is Saxony here where it started, create a defensive alliance and tell the emperor to come at them. Eventually the emperor does go at them. And he is able to win a number of important battles, but he's not actually able to wipe out Protestantism. And it's partially because the emperor has so many different enemies to fight that he really can't focus on Protestantism. He has to fight France, he has to fight the Turks. And so eventually the emperor is forced to accept the existence of Protestantism in northern Germany in the Peace of Augsburg in 1555. But this is very much a temporary peace. And after the Peace of Augsburg, religious warfare is going to continue in Spain, in France, between Spain and a number of important a number of countries, including the Netherlands and England. And eventually it's going to return to Germany with a vengeance in the early 1600s in the form of the 30 Years' War, which is the last but also the biggest of the religious conflicts. So anyway, to kind of sum up, these are the big things that happened during the Catholic Reformation. So hopefully you have a little bit of stuff to say for each of these. From here, we're going to be moving on to look at specific conflicts between Catholics and Protestants. Philip II, we'll look at the French Wars of Religion, and then we'll move on to look at the 30 Years' War, where the forces of Catholicism and Protestantism meet for one epic final struggle. So anyway, thanks for listening, and that's all I've got for you today.